I think we're through with the first step of forgiveness, so we can move on to the second, which basically is implicit in the first, because once we recall the projection and we say the guilt is not in this person that I have been attacking and judging against, but rather the guilt is in me, I can now look at that guilt with the same dispassionate gaze that I used when I looked at the guilt in another person, and I could understand that just as my attacking you represented a decision, the guilt in my mind is also reflective of a decision. The decision to listen to the ego instead of the Holy Spirit. In other words, just like my anger at you was all made up, so the guilt in my mind, which is the source of my anger at you, is also all made up. Right? Now this second step can be very difficult. What happens in this second step, he doesn't speak about it in terms of steps, but he kind of goes through what the process is, that when you suddenly realize that the gun that's pointed at your head is not being held by your brother, but is being held by yourself, he says this moment can be terrible. Right? I think it's a mild understatement. Right? And that's what, in a sense, impels us to then say, you know, I'd rather just die. Or, you know, life is really boring. This forgiveness stuff really is not as much fun as all that specialness stuff that I indulge in all my life, etc. All of which are really defenses against looking at this second step. Remember that the second step, which is acknowledging the guilt in ourselves, is the correction for the ego's second step, which is saying the guilt is real. And it was that acknowledgement that my guilt is real that literally was the cause of the miscreation of the physical universe. So you're really talking about a rather powerful thought, at least within the dream. Because I've sinned against God, and behind that guilt, of course, is this thought of this wrathful presence of God who destroyed me. It was that thought that impelled me, as part of the one son, one separated son, to project that thought out and literally make up a physical universe and sustain it. So again, my very existence, as a self that I define myself to be, is contingent upon my never looking at that guilt. In a way, one could say that the thought that preceded the projection of the guilt that made up this world, the thought that preceded it was the ego saying to us, don't ever look at this. Because if you look at this guilt, you'll be destroyed. Right? That's what's in back of the statement that Jesus makes in the section called the fear to look within. And he says, the ego counsels thus, do not look within, because if you do, your eyes will light on sin and God will strike you blind. Which is a euphemistic way of saying God will obliterate you. Right? That's what we hear. Do not look within at your guilt, because if you do, your eyes will light on it, on sin, and God will strike you blind. So from that point on, we stop seeing. And the ego made the body's eyes so that we wouldn't see. You know, as the Course says, eyes don't see, ears don't hear, they translate. They translate the wishes of the mind. So my mind wants me to see a world outside, a world of separation outside. It especially wants me to see a world of guilt outside. So it makes up a world, it makes up eyes to see it, but there's nothing there. But since our eyes see it, and our brain interprets it, and we have all this agreement with other people that what we're seeing is correct, then we're sure that it is correct. But all this was done so that we would not see. When the Course talks about vision, which is a major theme in the Course, the vision of Christ or the perception of the Holy Spirit, or true vision, or true perception, Jesus is talking about not looking through the body's eyes, but through the mind's eyes, which is a thought. So this entire world arose as the consequence of the ego saying to us, do not look within. And our whole existence, again, as this physical, psychological creature we call ourselves, is predicated upon our not looking within. That's why this Course is so difficult. That's why any true spirituality is so difficult. And why it's so easy that a religion starts or spirituality starts, and it starts on a very high level because the founder or the inspiration of the prophet is a very advanced person. And then just as quickly it turns into ritual. Why? Because ritual you could see. But you don't see it with your mind's eye, you see it with your body's eyes. You know, when you look at the great mythologies of the world, you know, the hero has to go through a ring of fire, or has to kill the dragon. Or all of these are symbols of getting past the barriers the ego has put up that says, don't go and don't find the treasure. Because the ego says, if you find the treasure, it's not a treasure. It will kill you. What the ego doesn't tell us, of course, is that it's the real treasure, because that's where the memory of God's love is. But you have to go through what the ego has told you is this whole slew of dragons. You know, the circle of fire, you know, all these tremendous tasks that the hero has to perform. At times I think it's helpful if you're familiar with some of the great mythologies of the world and the great kind of stories, because they reflect all this. This is not an easy path. Right? Now the Course will say it's not the only path, but it's certainly a wonderful one, and it's one of the very few that focuses on this aspect of the journey. You don't need a PhD in psychology to understand it, but you certainly need some kind of understanding and appreciation of the process of coming to grips with your own unconscious, or your own psyche, because that's where all the problems are. Not only is the guilt unconscious, the Holy Spirit is unconscious, because we're not aware of the mind. So the second step is very difficult, only because there's so much fear associated with it. What makes us able to go through it, go through the circle of fear, this terror, is understanding that that we've had enough experiences to know there's something else. There's really something behind the guilt. You know, you need to go very slowly, and each step along the way. Remember, the 3 steps I'm talking about is not the whole ladder. In the sense that those are the 3 groups. There are all the little steps that constitute all of our experiences and our lessons in our life. That these little steps have to be very heavily reinforced, as one passage in the Course says, so that I learn that I'm really better off listening to Jesus rather than to my ego. I'm really better off questioning my judgments instead of stubbornly insisting, adamantly insisting that I'm right. And I have to have a whole series of experiences behind me that will allow me to take this next step. Near the end of Chapter 18, Jesus talks about how the Holy Spirit will lead us through the circle of fear, and God is on the other side. That you can't get from the darkness to the light without going through the darkness, without going through this valley of desolation, without looking at the belief that tells us that we are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. And all that's necessary for this to occur is that we have a little willingness to ask for help, that we look at the world differently and see the world then as the classroom or the outpicturing of the inner world. And where the intellectual understanding of the Course's theory is so important is I can understand the purpose. The text helps me understand why I do this. Otherwise it makes no sense. So I do it because that's what keeps the fear of God away, which keeps the ego's fear of my choosing God. I understand the purpose. I don't beat up on myself anymore now when I don't do the workbook the way I think I should, or when I don't forgive the way I think I should, because now I understand. I understand what resistance is, I understand where it comes from, I understand the whole concept of purpose, and I know that there is a method in terms of all the insane things that I've done and still do. But if I could look at that without judgment, I'm doing exactly what the Course asks me to do. The little willingness can be defined as my little willingness to look at my ego without judgment. I don't defend it, I don't rationalize it, I don't spiritualize it, I don't deny it, I look at it. But I look at it without judging myself. And again, if I could look at my ego without judging it, I certainly will look at other people's egos without judging them. And again, everybody around you will be very glad and grateful. Right? And they'll say, boy, what's happened to you? Right? And if you're wise, you'll just smile sweetly. You'll be like Cordelia, you'll love and be silent.